At 35,000 feet, inside the quiet luxury of Helios Airways Flight 912's first-class cabin, a single moment shattered the illusion of order. A 12-year-old black girl, traveling alone, was accused of not belonging in her seat. In full view of elite passengers, the chief flight attendant leaned down and struck her. What no one knew was that this child wasn't just another passenger. She was the adopted daughter of the airline's majority shareholder, and by the time the wheels touched London, the slap that echoed in the cabin would destroy careers, rewrite policies, and shake an entire system. The soft hum of Helios Airways Flight HX912's first-class cabin carried a certain kind of silence, one built from money, privilege, and unspoken rules. Passengers sipped champagne and adjusted designer watches as the boarding door closed. In seat 2A sat Amara Lewis, a 12-year-old girl in a simple navy hoodie and faded jeans, her dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail. She didn't wear the usual trappings of first class. No luxury handbag, no diamond studs, just a small backpack tucked neatly beneath her seat. The moment Sandra Cole, the chief flight attendant, noticed her, something shifted in the air. Sandra's polished smile froze for a fraction of a second, replaced by a glint of skepticism. She scanned the seating chart, then looked back at Amara. "Sweetheart, I think you might be in the wrong seat," she said, her voice sugary but edged with condescension. Amara lifted her boarding pass calmly. "This is my seat, 2A." Sandra's eyes narrowed just slightly. "First class is an exclusive cabin. Are you traveling alone?" Heads began to turn. A businessman in 2C glanced over his newspaper. Curiosity piqued. Another passenger adjusted his tie, openly staring. Amara met Sandra's gaze without flinching. "Yes, I'm traveling alone. My ticket is valid." Sandra gave a thin smile, the kind reserved for passengers she had already decided were difficult. "Sometimes mistakes happen at check-in. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable." She gestured vaguely toward the economy cabin. Amara's tone didn't rise. It was level, steady. "I'm comfortable here." A faint ripple of tension swept the cabin. The businessman in 2C smirked. "Seems the kid's holding her ground." Sandra's expression hardened. She leaned closer, her voice dropping so only Amara could hear. "Listen, young lady, there are rules here, and you don't get to disrupt my cabin." Amara simply repeated, "This is my seat." Something in that calm defiance sparked something ugly. Sandra straightened, her voice rising just enough to draw attention. "Passengers must comply with crew instructions," she announced, a statement meant for everyone else as much as for Amara. The silence that followed felt electric. Amara didn't move. She didn't lower her eyes. And then, in one sharp, shocking motion, Sandra's open hand struck across Amara's cheek. The sound cracked through the cabin like breaking glass. Gasps erupted. The businessman in 2C froze mid-sip of champagne. A woman in 3B clapped her hand over her mouth. Amara's head turned with the force of the slap, but she didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed forward, her cheek blooming red. The hum of first class had been replaced by something heavier, an unspoken, shared realization that what had just happened would not be easily forgotten. The cabin fell into a stunned silence. The echo of the slap still lingered in the air, as though the very walls of the aircraft were holding their breath. Amara slowly lifted her hand to her cheek, feeling the sting radiating beneath her fingers. Her small palm pressed against the warmth, but she didn't cry. Not a sound escaped her lips. Sandra, catching her own reflection in the polished veneer of the bulkhead, straightened her uniform and forced a brittle smile, as if nothing had happened. "Young lady, I will be speaking to the captain about your behavior. Disrespect will not be tolerated in my cabin," she said sharply, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard. A murmur swept through the nearby seats. The businessman in 2C shifted uncomfortably. The woman in 3B opened her mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it. People glanced at one another, waiting for someone else to take the risk. Amara's gaze remained steady. her hands folded in her lap now, cheeks still flushed. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. The quietness was more unsettling than any protest could have been. One man, a middle-aged passenger in 4A, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Miss Cole. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. The young lady—" Sandra snapped around, the brittle edge of her smile gone. "Sir, this is a crew matter. Interfering with crew duties can result in removal from the flight. I suggest you stay seated." Her words landed like a slap in themselves. The man sank back into his seat, frowning. The atmosphere thickened, heavy and sour. Every passenger could feel the injustice, yet the unspoken fear of confrontation held them in place. First class, a sanctuary of control and decorum, had become a theater of silent witnesses. Sandra turned back to Amara, her voice now soft but laced with steel. "You will remain in your seat. Any further disruption will be reported to the captain immediately. Do you understand?" Amara nodded once, her face unreadable. Sandra gave a curt nod, satisfied she had reasserted her authority, and stepped away to tend to other passengers. The moment she was gone, the woman in 3B leaned slightly toward Amara, her voice a whisper. "Are you okay, dear?" Amara offered a faint smile, but said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. Around her, the cabin slowly returned to its mechanical hum, but it wasn't the same. There was a tension beneath the quiet, a collective unease that made the air feel heavier. The sense of injustice sat like a weight in every chest, but no one moved. The girl in 2A sat still, the picture of composure, her cheek still bearing the faint mark of Sandra Cole's hand. Edward Blake, a composed man in his late 40s seated in 4A, adjusted his glasses as he reached casually for his phone. His calm demeanor betrayed none of the careful calculation behind his movements. While Sandra bustled away, confident she had ended the confrontation, Edward tapped his camera app and angled the lens just enough to capture Amara in frame. Her calm face, the fading red mark, and the quiet tension that still rippled through the cabin. He had seen situations like this before, though rarely so brazen in first class. His legal instincts told him this moment could become important, very important. 2 rows back, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, an elegantly dressed woman in her 70s, leaned forward. Her pearl necklace caught the cabin light as she spoke in a low, deliberate voice. "Dear, are you traveling alone? Is there someone waiting for you in London?" Amara turned her head slightly, her expression softening just enough to acknowledge the kindness. "Yes, ma'am. Someone will meet me there." Before Evelyn could respond, Sandra reappeared, her smile tighter than ever. "Mrs. Hart, please refrain from interfering with crew matters," she said crisply, her tone polite but edged. "The young lady is fine and will remain seated." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she leaned back slowly, her jaw set. She had been put in her place, at least for now. Amara glanced briefly toward Edward. For just a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition perhaps, that he was not merely a bystander. Once Sandra moved further down the aisle, Amara slipped her small hand into the pocket of her hoodie and drew out a sleek, unmarked phone. She moved deliberately, almost casually, as though she were simply checking the time. Her fingers tapped with quiet precision. HX912 compromised. Asset compromised. Proceed. LHR. The message was sent in less than 5 seconds, encrypted and transmitted to a single contact. The phone disappeared back into her pocket as if it had never been there. No one around her noticed, except Edward, who had caught the subtle motion. His mind churned. That wasn't a normal message for a 12-year-old to send. Amara sat back in her seat, her expression once again neutral. She turned her gaze toward the window, the morning light glinting off the clouds as the aircraft leveled off into its cruising altitude. For the first time since the slap, the tension in the cabin shifted slightly. There was still injustice in the air, but somewhere in the undercurrent, there was movement. Something unseen had been set into motion. The seatbelt sign had just dimmed when Sandra stepped briskly toward the cockpit, her heels tapping a controlled rhythm against the carpet. She disappeared behind the reinforced door for less than a minute before emerging, her posture sharper, her expression carrying the smug confidence of someone who believed backup was on the way. Passengers in first class shifted uneasily. A few exchanged glances, sensing the shift in energy. It didn't take long. The cockpit door opened again, and out stepped Captain Richard Hawke. His uniform was immaculate, the gold trim on his epaulets catching the overhead lights. His gaze swept the cabin, landing on Sandra first, then on Amara. "Captain," Sandra began with an air of exaggerated professionalism, "we have a passenger in 2A refusing to comply with crew instructions. I thought it best to bring it to your attention." Hawke's expression hardened. He turned his full height toward Amara, standing over her seat. "Young lady," he said, voice resonant and commanding, "this is my aircraft. When my crew gives you an instruction, you follow it immediately. Is that understood?" Amara's eyes lifted to meet his. "Captain, I have followed all safety instructions. My seat and belongings are in order." Her voice was calm, but steady. Hawke's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to measured responses from someone he'd already judged as subordinate. "Sandra tells me you refuse to allow your bag to be stored properly. That kind of attitude can get you removed from this flight." The businessman in 2C shifted uncomfortably. "Captain, if I may, there's more than enough room in the bin. This seems..." Hawke's hand came up, silencing him without a word. "This is a crew matter, sir. Please remain seated." Turning back to Amara, Hawke leaned closer. "You have two options. Either your bag goes under the seat, or you will be escorted off this aircraft before we even leave the ground." The murmurs in the cabin thickened. It was clear to everyone that this wasn't about safety, but no one spoke up again. The power dynamic was heavy, unshakable. Sandra, standing just behind Hawke, folded her arms with quiet satisfaction. Amara didn't move. Her voice, still soft, simply said, "The bag stays where it is. I am not obstructing anyone." Hawke's nostrils flared. "One more word, and you will be removed." The tension was unbearable. Hawke straightened, motioning for Sandra to prepare. The captain's authority filled the cabin like a storm cloud. For the moment, the balance of power tilted sharply toward the crew, leaving Amara seemingly isolated again. Captain Hawke stood tall for a moment longer, convinced his words had ended the matter. Sandra's lips curled in a satisfied half-smile, as though order had been restored. She stepped forward, briskly reaching toward the overhead bin. Amara didn't stop her this time. She sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap. The quietness was unsettling. No protest, no tears, just calm acceptance. Sandra placed the backpack under the seat with a crisp efficiency, then straightened, brushing imaginary lint from her uniform. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said, her voice dripping with false civility. To the casual observer, it looked as if the incident was over. Hawke gave a curt nod, casting one last sharp glance at Amara before retreating toward the cockpit. Sandra followed him halfway down the aisle, pausing to murmur reassurances to the nearby passengers. The businessman in 2C muttered under his breath, "Poor kid." His words were swallowed by the soft drone of the engines. Amara's gaze remained fixed on the seat in front of her. Outwardly, she looked like any other child forced into silence by authority. But her eyes, steady, unblinking, held a stillness that felt unnatural for someone her age. Edward Blake in 4A noticed. He had been watching her closely, waiting for a sign that she was shaken or defeated. Instead, he saw a quiet determination that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Mrs. Evelyn Hart, still unsettled, leaned forward slightly. "Are you all right, dear?" she whispered again. Amara turned her head just enough to meet the older woman's gaze. There was a faint, reassuring curve to her lips. "I'm fine. Thank you." Her tone carried no trace of fear. The rest of the flight settled into a strained quiet. Sandra moved through the cabin with rehearsed cheer, offering champagne to passengers who barely touched their glasses. Hawke's voice came over the intercom, confident and controlled. giving the flight time and weather over the Atlantic. But beneath the surface, the air in first class felt charged, as though the cabin itself was holding onto a secret. Amara shifted in her seat, slipping her small hands into the pocket of her hoodie again. She didn't take out her phone this time. There was no need. Her part was done. For now, she simply leaned back, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. To the crew, it looked like quiet compliance. To the handful of observant passengers, it looked like something else entirely. A calm before a storm they couldn't yet name. In the glass-walled executive suite of Helios Airways London headquarters, Charles Graham, the airline's CEO, was reviewing a quarterly performance report when a discreet alert blinked on his private device. It wasn't the kind of notification he could ignore. The words were short, precise, and chilling in their familiarity. HX912 compromised, asset compromised, proceed LHR. Charles's pen froze mid-note. His jaw tightened. "Oh no," he muttered under his breath. Without hesitation, he pressed a secure line. "Get legal in here, and security, now!" Across town, at a private penthouse, Helena Lewis, the elusive majority shareholder of Helios Airways, received the same encrypted message. She was in the middle of a high-level investment call when her assistant slipped the phone onto the table. Helena's eyes scanned the screen, her face changing instantly. She ended the call without explanation. "Cancel my schedule. Have the car ready in 2 minutes. We're going to Heathrow." Back at headquarters, Charles's office filled rapidly. Eleanor Vance, the sharp-eyed head of legal, entered with a thick binder under her arm. Behind her came the director of corporate security, earpiece in place, already dialing ahead to coordinate airport arrangements. "Is it confirmed?" Eleanor asked, setting the binder on the table. Charles nodded grimly. "It's confirmed. Helena's on her way." Within minutes, the plan was in motion. A private conference room at Heathrow's Terminal 5 was secured. Ground security was notified discreetly. No details leaked to press, no unnecessary chatter. In the back of a black sedan speeding toward the airport, Helena's gaze was fixed on the city rushing past the tinted windows. She rarely involved herself directly with operational issues. Delegation was her specialty. But a red code involving her adopted daughter, that was personal. Meanwhile, on flight HX912, Amara sat quietly in her seat. She had no way of knowing the exact moves being made on the ground, but she didn't need to. The coded message was designed for efficiency. No names, no explanations, just action. Captain Hawk and Sandra continued their routines, oblivious to the storm assembling in London. Passengers, unaware of the greater significance, returned to their books and screens, though a subtle unease still clung to the cabin. For those paying close attention, Edward Blake in 4A, Mrs. Hart in 3B, there was something unmistakable about the way Amara sat, calm as still water. They couldn't place it yet, but it was clear this was not the end of the story. On the ground at Heathrow, black cars were pulling into place. Lawyers, executives, and security waited in a sealed VIP corridor. Whatever had happened at 35,000 feet, the reckoning would be waiting when the aircraft's doors opened. The descent into London was smooth, the golden haze of early morning streaming into the cabin windows. Captain Hawk's voice over the intercom was crisp and professional, announcing the local time and weather, masking any trace of the earlier tension. Sandra moved through the aisle, her composure polished, her voice pleasant. To her, the situation had been contained. Amara sat quietly, her expression unchanged. If anything, she looked almost serene as passengers began gathering their belongings. Sandra, seeing her stillness, interpreted it as silent defeat. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Sandra straightened her uniform and positioned herself by the front door, preparing to disembark passengers with her usual confident smile. Hawk would soon join her, and together they would present the image of control to whoever was waiting outside. The jet bridge docked with a gentle thud. A chime signaled the seatbelt sign had been turned off. The first-class cabin stirred as passengers rose, pulling down bags, eager to leave. Sandra adjusted her scarf, ready to greet the first passengers, when she caught sight of something unusual through the small window in the cabin door. 2 black sedans had pulled up directly to the jet bridge. Standing at the entryway were Charles Graham, CEO of Helios Airways, and a tall, poised woman in a tailored navy suit, Helena Lewis herself. Sandra's breath caught. Helena never appeared at arrival gates. The door opened. Charles stepped forward, his expression controlled but grave. Helena followed, her gaze sweeping the cabin until it landed squarely on 2A. In an instant, her face softened. She crossed the cabin without hesitation. "Amara," Helena said, her voice warm but edged with concern. She bent down, pulling the girl into a brief but protective embrace. "Kon Koan Kung." The air in the cabin shifted instantly. Passengers froze, glancing at one another in shock. Sandra's eyes widened, her carefully composed mask beginning to crack. Charles Graham addressed the stunned cabin, his tone courteous but weighted. "Ladies and gentlemen, please allow us to attend to an important matter before deplaning. We appreciate your cooperation." Sandra's mind raced, the pieces falling into place with dreadful clarity. Amara Lewis, Helena's last name, the encrypted authority in the CEO's voice. This was no ordinary passenger. This was the adopted daughter of the airline's controlling shareholder. Her throat went dry. The confidence she had worn like armor all flight slipped away in an instant. Helena kept a steady arm around Amara, her voice low but carrying enough for Sandra to hear. "We'll handle this properly, right now." Sandra's knees felt weak. For the first time since takeoff, she realized she wasn't in control. Sandra stood frozen by the cabin door, her pulse thundering in her ears as Helena guided Amara gently toward the jet bridge. Every calculated inch of her professionalism began to splinter. "Helena!" Sandra blurted, her voice trembling just enough to betray her fear. "Ms. Lewis, I didn't realize—" Helena's gaze cut to her briefly. The look was calm, but there was nothing forgiving in it. Sandra scrambled to fill the silence. "If I had known who she was, I would never— it was a misunderstanding. I thought—" Her words tumbled over themselves, desperate, frantic. She clung to the single hope that ignorance of Amara's identity might soften the inevitable blow. Charles Graham stepped in, his voice cool. "Sandra, now is not the time for excuses. We will address this in the appropriate setting." "But—" Helena's voice, quiet but sharp as glass, cut through Sandra's plea. "Enough!" The single word silenced the cabin. Helena's attention returned to Amara, who remained composed, her small hands clasped in front of her. Sandra's throat went dry. A seed of hope still twisted inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this could be smoothed over. Perhaps Helena's presence here was to manage appearances, not to ruin her career. After all, no passengers were physically harmed, at least not in a way that would leave lasting injury. The businessman from 2C shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the stakes. A murmur passed through the remaining passengers, hushed and tense. Helena looked to Charles. "We're not discussing this here." Charles nodded. "Agreed. We have the conference room at Terminal 5 prepared." Sandra's chest tightened. A formal meeting could mean anything: warning, suspension, or termination. But the fact that Helena had not publicly denounced her right there sparked a dangerous glimmer of hope. Perhaps, she thought wildly, this could be salvaged. If she could explain her perspective, emphasize her years of service, frame the incident as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, surely Helena wouldn't risk unnecessary scandal. As passengers began deplaning under the guidance of another attendant, Sandra stood stiffly, her mind spinning with carefully rehearsed apologies and appeals. Helena didn't look at her again. She merely said, "Bring them both. We'll handle this at the office." Them both. Sandra's stomach dropped further as she realized Hawk's name was now entangled in this mess. Her last sight of Amara as they left the cabin was the girl's calm face, utterly unreadable. The uncertainty was unbearable. Sandra clung to her final thought like a lifeline. If Helena hadn't fired her immediately, there was still a chance. The conference room at Terminal 5 was far removed from the bustle of the airport, soundproofed and furnished with polished oak. At the far end of the table sat Helena Lewis, her presence commanding the room. Amara sat beside her, legs crossed neatly, her calm demeanor contrasting with the tension in the air. Sandra was escorted in first, her posture rigid. Captain Hawk followed moments later, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes flickered with unease. Charles Graham took a seat opposite them, flanked by Eleanor Vance, the head of legal. Helena's voice broke the silence. "Amara, please tell us what happened." Amara spoke with quiet precision, recounting the events without exaggeration or emotion. Her small voice filled the room, measured and steady. When she finished, Helena nodded toward Eleanor. "Evidence?" Eleanor tapped a remote, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. Edward Blake's video began to play, captured from his discreet position in 4A. The slap, Sandra's tone, Hawk's threat, every moment replayed in crisp, undeniable clarity. Sandra's face drained of color. Hawk's jaw tightened as he realized his own words had been recorded. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Helena's gaze shifted to Sandra. "You struck a 12-year-old passenger in first class. Explain." Sandra's voice trembled. "It was an error in judgment. Helena raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "No, this is not about error. This is about attitude, professionalism, and judgment. You failed on all counts." Turning to Charles, Helena's voice was crisp. "Effective immediately, Sandra Cole is terminated. Her access is revoked. HR will process her separation." Sandra's breath caught. "Ms. Lewis, please." Helena's eyes hardened. "I don't care who you thought she was. Every passenger deserves the same respect. You've proven you can't uphold that." Sandra slumped back, the fight draining from her entirely. Helena's attention moved to Hawk. "As for you, Captain Hawk, your behavior compounded the issue. Your threats were disproportionate, your judgment reckless. Effective immediately, you are suspended from active duty, pending a full investigation by the Civil Aviation Authority." Hawk's mouth tightened, but he gave a stiff nod. Charles added, "The CAA will review this. Your license will remain suspended until they reach a decision." Around the table, the atmosphere shifted. For Sandra and Hawk, the weight of consequence was immediate. For Helena, Charles, and Eleanor, this was more than discipline. It was a message to the entire company. Outside the room, word would spread quickly. For those who had witnessed the slap in the cabin, justice was already taking shape. 2 days after the disciplinary meeting, the situation took an unexpected turn. Sandra Cole emerged from the shadows of her apartment, her hair tied back and expression hardened. A swarm of reporters caught sight of her stepping into a law firm on Fleet Street. The story leaked quickly. Sandra was consulting with a legal team to challenge her dismissal. Her claim was bold: wrongful termination. She argued that she had been unfairly targeted and that her dismissal was disproportionate to the incident. To the media, she hinted at discrimination, not against Amara, but against herself as a veteran employee being sacrificed to protect corporate image. The tabloids ate it up. Headlines speculated whether Helios Airways had acted too quickly, whether the incident was being exaggerated because of the passenger's connection to Helena Lewis. Meanwhile, Captain Hawk was quietly rallying his allies. Though officially grounded, he reached out to the pilots' union, framing the suspension as a dangerous precedent, one that could allow corporate politics to override flight deck authority. His tone was careful, measured, but designed to plant seeds of doubt. In closed meetings, union representatives debated their response. Hawk's career was on the line, but so was the perception of their collective bargaining power. If the airline could remove a captain so swiftly, what would that mean for everyone else? Inside Helios headquarters, Charles Graham briefed Helena. Sandra's filing is designed for headlines, not a courtroom. But Hawk's case is trickier. The union could become a real obstacle if they see this as a power grab. Helena's expression remained calm, but her voice was cold. They're playing for sympathy. We'll respond with facts. Charles hesitated. The public narrative is shifting. People are starting to ask questions. If either of them gains traction, Helena cut him off. They won't. The truth doesn't bend to the loudest voice. It bends to the strongest evidence. We have that. But outside the boardroom, tension grew. Social media buzzed with speculation. Anonymous sources, sympathetic to Sandra, claimed she had been humiliated without due process. Hawk's supporters hinted that Amara's identity was an unfair advantage, a hidden card pulled at the last minute. For the first time since the plane landed, the outcome seemed less certain. Passengers who had witnessed the slap began receiving calls from reporters. Edward Blake, still holding the original video, was contacted for comment, but he declined, waiting for the right moment. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just shifted to a much more public battlefield. The media storm reached its peak just as Helena Lewis made her move. At a press conference held in Helios Airways' London headquarters, Helena walked onto the stage flanked by Charles Graham and Eleanor Vance. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, expecting corporate platitudes or evasive statements. Helena began calmly. Questions have been raised about recent personnel decisions. Today, we will address them with facts. Eleanor stepped forward, opening a folder thick with documents. Sandra Cole, she began, has a documented history of passenger complaints spanning 5 years. Records show repeated accusations of discriminatory behavior toward passengers of minority backgrounds. Each was resolved quietly with warnings, but no formal action. Until now. Screens lit up behind them, displaying anonymized complaint summaries, inappropriate remarks, preferential treatment of certain passengers, hostility toward others. Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Helena turned to Hawk's case. Captain Richard Hawk has 3 formal complaints for abuse of authority, each previously dismissed as crew discipline. His behavior on Flight HX912 was not an isolated lapse. It was part of a pattern we can no longer ignore. The next slide displayed Hawk's history of cabin incidents, including witness statements from previous flights. Reporters scribbled furiously. The public narrative shifted in real time. What had been framed as a sudden, heavy-handed punishment was now exposed as the inevitable result of repeated misconduct. Helena's voice remained steady. Effective immediately, both Sandra Cole and Richard Hawk will forfeit all severance benefits. Neither will be eligible for re-employment in any capacity within the aviation industry. Their conduct has breached not only the trust of this company, but the trust of every passenger we serve. There was a moment of silence as the weight of her words settled. Then Helena shifted tone, speaking directly to the heart of the matter. This is not only about 2 employees. It is about the culture that allowed these incidents to happen. Helios Airways will launch the Every Passenger Counts initiative, a comprehensive reform of service, training, and accountability from the ground crew to the flight deck, and Charles added. This initiative will include bias awareness training, real-time passenger feedback integration, and new performance metrics tied directly to executive compensation. The press room buzzed as Helena concluded, "Respect is not optional. It is the standard. And from this moment forward, that standard will be visible in every interaction, every flight." The headlines shifted within hours. What had been a scandal was now a story of decisive leadership and systemic reform. Sandra and Hawk's final hopes evaporated in the wake of undeniable evidence. The industry took notice. 2 years later, Helios Airways looked almost unrecognizable. The same gold and navy livery decorated the aircraft, but the atmosphere inside told a very different story. On a crisp spring morning, Flight HX319 from New York to London was boarding its first-class cabin. At the front of the jet bridge, Helena Lewis walked beside her now 14-year-old daughter, Amara. Time had added a quiet confidence to the young girl's demeanor, but the composure in her eyes was the same. As they stepped into the cabin, a young flight attendant greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Lewis. Miss Amara, we're honored to have you today." Amara returned the smile. "Thank you. It's nice to be here." The cabin looked brighter, not because of any design change, but because of the way the crew interacted with the passengers. The energy was open, respectful, warm. A family in business class was helped with their bags without the faintest trace of impatience. A passenger in economy who spoke limited English was guided to their seat with genuine care. Amara settled into 2A, the same seat where 2 years earlier the infamous incident had occurred. But this time there was no tension in the air, only the quiet hum of a well-run flight. Helena sat beside her, glancing around the cabin. She noticed the small touches of the Every Passenger Counts initiative. Multilingual service cards, discreet bias awareness pins on crew lapels, and most of all, a level of attentiveness that felt genuine. Halfway through boarding, a flight attendant knelt briefly by Amara's seat. "Miss Amara, if there's anything you need, anything at all, please let us know." Amara smiled, appreciating the kindness but sensing it was offered to everyone now, not just her. Helena leaned back, her gaze softening as she looked at her daughter. "You know," she said quietly, "you didn't just stand up for yourself that day. You changed the way this airline treats every single person who walks through its doors." Amara tilted her head, a small smile curving her lips. "I just wanted people to be treated right." Helena's expression warmed. "And they are, because of you." As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Amara looked out the window. The engines rumbled softly, and the world began to move. For the passengers, it was just another flight. For Helena and Amara, it was something more, a living reminder that change was possible, and that sometimes it started in the quietest, most unexpected ways. The sky opened ahead, smooth and endless. And this time, the journey felt free of old shadows.